Hello, everybody. My name is Ann Malkin, and I'm here with my colleague Ann Morris from the PPA, the Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy Association, talking about the intensive training that we offer here at BPF. I chair the training committee, and Ann, we're both Anns, is vice chair, and she also chairs the selection subcommittee. So she's the person that people have the initial contacts with when they make inquiries about doing the training. We're going to take you through some elements of the training, and there'll be opportunities for questions afterwards. So let me just share my screen if I can get to that. Yeah. The PPA is one of the associations of BPS, which was formed in 2013 from the merger of the three London-based organizations offering training in intensive analytic work. These organizations were the BAP, the LCP, and the Lincoln Centre. The PPA training took the best from all these organizations to develop the training in intensive psychoanalytic work, which is fit for a diverse and multicultural society in the 21st century. The training leads to a qualification in psychoanalytic psychotherapy, membership of the PPA and of the BPF, and registration with the British BPC, British Psychoanalytic Council. The training also ensures training in less intensive work, enabling graduates to work both privately and in the statutory NHS or voluntary charity sector. Just want to emphasize that the BPF is very mindful of the richness of diversity within the population and aims to provide trainings that ensure that all our graduates can work with people from diverse backgrounds with differing needs and varied beliefs. BPF values diversity and welcomes applications from all sections of the community. I know that psychoanalysis has had bad press over the years in terms of this whole diversity issue. It's been accused sometimes quite accurately, unfortunately, of being sexist, bourgeois, homophobic, and various other things. But we are working very hard to make it fit for purpose in the current situation. And our curriculum reflects that although a lot of the early work was very Eurocentric, tended to be, as people accuse it of, bourgeois, there's been a lot of work going on that has been looking at those things and developing a more appropriate theory and ways of working. And we constantly update our curriculum to make sure that we reflect this. How long does it take? Well, it's a long training. It's an intensive and rigorous training, and it takes a minimum of 4.5 years part-time. Seminars are held on Tuesday evenings, and there are 3 terms of 10 weeks, plus 2 Saturday mornings per term. There's also a modified entry scheme for people who've done another sort of analytic or psychodynamic training, and this takes about 2 years or 2.5 years. Again, the seminars are on Tuesday evenings, and participation in Saturday seminars is voluntary. In terms of who we look to train, it's the people. We look for personal qualities, the capacity to do this kind of work. We do want people to have an undergraduate degree or equivalent, so it's not absolutely a requirement that people are graduates. We look very much at relevant life and work experience, and we do want people, when they start our training, to have had experience of being in intensive psychoanalytic psychotherapy or psychoanalysis. Give you some idea of some of the personal qualities that we look at. I won't go through them, you can read them. You don't need to take notes, people. All these slides will be available on the website after this event, and there's a recording of the open day as well. Okay. move on to the next slide.
So shall I speak to this?
Yeah.
Yes. So this is important to bear in mind that PPA advisors are available by email, phone or video link to advise and support people interested in finding out more about the training and in applying. It's a complex process, readying yourself to apply, and we encourage people to take up the opportunity of speaking to a PPA advisor. They will also give potential applicants details about the application and selection process. And they're available to advise potential applicants on what experience they need prior to applying, how to access this, and what they might do to prepare for application and selection. So the formal training, this consists for the full route, this consists of theory seminars, weekly through term time and 2 Saturdays per term for 4 years. And this is for the people on the full route, they will be participating in a small cohort, which will be consistent throughout their training years. People on the training need to have done or to do an infant observation. This can be for 2 years for someone who's applied before doing the training, or for people who apply when they're on the training or have an offer of training, there is an option to do a 1-year infant observation course. The 2-year course is nevertheless the richer experience. People who haven't had experience of working in psychiatric settings are required to do a psychiatric placement in an adult NHS mental health setting. And typically this will be a commitment of about half a day as an observer for a period of about 6 months. People who have had prior experience are required to set out their experience for the training committee, so we know what at the time of application or soon after what experience, the detail of their experience. Clinical placements are important too for people who have had very little clinical practice before applying for the training. And they offer the opportunity to work psychotherapeutically, less intensively, under supervision. People with previous experience, perhaps as counsellors or psychodynamic therapists, are unlikely to be required to do an additional clinical placement. And the clinical seminars are weekly for the duration of the training, and both seminars, clinical and theory, are on a Tuesday evening at our building in Kilburn. The clinical component of the training, typically on the full training route, it's in the 2nd year that trainees take their first intensive psychotherapy patient. And this will be a patient they see for a minimum of 3 times weekly, supervised weekly, and for 2 years, and then following on, usually a few months later, a second training patient, also seen 3 times weekly, supervised weekly, for at least 18 months. And throughout, the trainee will be in intensive psychotherapy or analysis themselves.
Sorry, Okay.
Are we ready to carry on here? The modified entry scheme or route is a training route which is designed for people who've already done a substantial training in psychoanalytic or psychotherapy and wish to train in intensive psychoanalytic work with adults. And both routes lead to the same qualification, it should be clear. So the MES route may be suitable for people who have trained with a different client group or modality, perhaps child and adolescent, couples, groups, art psychotherapists, or at a different intensity, perhaps having qualified as psychodynamic psychotherapists. And they will usually have had substantial intensive psychotherapy prior to training, or if not, will undertake intensive therapy during their training. The theory seminar requirement for MES trainees is to attend a minimum of 30 seminars across the time they're on the training, but may do more, and most do more, to top up on areas not previously covered. And this is something where sometimes talking, being in discussion with your personal tutor is helpful in thinking about what seminars to select. Clinical seminars are required, attendance at clinical seminars are required for the duration of the training. And the clinical work is the same requirement as on the full route. Requirement to see 2 intensive patients, 1 for at least 2 years, 1 for at least 18 months, supervise weekly, and to see the patient at least 3 times weekly. And there may be a requirement to top up any of the other elements of training not previously completed. This is usually discussed at the time of selection, and it may mean undertaking an infant observation, for example, or it might mean undertaking psychiatric placement.
Okay. The course is run by a training committee comprising about 13 experienced psychotherapists who have different roles. The committee meets monthly during term time, and the progress of trainees is considered throughout the training. Trainees are assigned a tutor at the start of their training. The tutor is available to discuss progress, any difficulties or issues that arise, and to jointly, together with the trainee, consider any difficulties that may arise and how to address them. The tutor is the trainee's main link to the training committee, and they meet with the trainee at least once a term but are available more frequently than that. We're aware that it's a very demanding training. We're aware that life happens at the same time as training, and we want to make sure that we offer as much access and support to trainees as they might require for the duration of the training. And the tutor is the person who offers this. We also have, obviously, people who do the teaching, seminar leaders and supervisors, and they write regular reports on the trainee's progress, which are shared with the trainee. Trainees, once they're seeing their intensive patients, also write 6 monthly clinical reports on their training patients. And they also write a final clinical paper, which is a 6,000-word paper, on one of their patients. There are writing seminars with designated writing tutors to assist trainees in this work. We're aware that not everybody finds it easy to write, and we do try and support them. So they're the writing tutors who offer seminars, and they also offer individual tutorials to help the trainees. And all the progress reports are sent to the training committee for discussion. Any concerns will also be discussed, and the committee will agree the best way forward to support the training. We also welcome feedback from the trainees about what they feel is useful and good and helpful, and what they feel that the training committee could be doing better. So we do have termly plenary sessions on Saturdays when the seminars are held, at least 2 terms per year, sometimes 3, where the trainees have the opportunity to meet with the training committee for open discussion on any topic that the trainees wish to raise. We find this, the training committee find this extraordinarily helpful, because feedback which we sometimes get, not at the plenaries, but through tutors or through a trainee making contact with a member of the training committee or at the plenaries, do help us to recognize what's good, what's not so good, and helps us to shape the training and to improve it. So the feedback is really, really crucial. Trainees also have access to the library and online access to papers on their reading lists. And they're also invited to participate in activities of the BPF and the PPA as a whole, so to attend scientific meetings and other BPF lectures and conferences and seminars. We do like to make people feel that they're part not only of the training, but of the organization as a whole. And I think a lot of people do feel that. Any questions? When can we apply for the PPA intensive, and when does the course begin? The applications the course begins in January each year. It's a bit of a quirk. I'm not sure quite how that happened, but it was happening that way before I joined the training committee. We are looking to perhaps change that to a September start, so it's in line with all the other trainings, but at the moment it's a January start. And we accept applications throughout the year, but usually have a closing date in the summer. And interviews are held through the year, but sometimes applications come in quite late, and then we'll organize the interviews in the autumn sometime. MES applications can happen at any time of the year, and MES people accepted to do the MES, the modified entry, can join the training at any point of the year at the start of a term. So there isn't a start date for MES trainees, but for the full training at the moment it's in January, and closing date usually is in the early summer, but we do interview later, and we will sometimes accept late applications.
Is it worth adding, Anne, that MES applicants will join a clinical group that's where we feel that it's a level of experience that will match their own experience, so that they will be joining they'll be on the course individually, but placed in a clinical group, joining with others on the full.
Yeah. And so they get to know people in their group, but also in attending the theory seminars, they get to know a broader spectrum of the trainees as well. The main theoretical threads, that's a very good question, very important question. We do try to offer a very broad training covering the main British schools. So that is obviously Freud and classical psychoanalysis and the contemporary Freudians, Klein and beyond, and the post-Kleinians, and the British independent tradition. That is the main theoretical thrust of the training, which is the British schools. We do offer short courses as well on some of the non-British schools. So currently there is a module on the American schools, and at times there have been modules on the French schools. So we do try and keep it very open, and we appreciate that there's a lot of interest in theory outside of the typical British ones, but the focus, being a British society, it's in the name, is very much on the British schools. But in the range of British schools, we hope that people do get an opportunity to learn about the different approaches, regardless of what their own personal orientation is. And we do ensure that the clinical seminars have seminar leaders from the main British schools, so people do get a real sense of how the different theoretical orientations affect the way people work clinically. Hi, I'm from China, and I'm extremely interested in taking analytical training with the BPF. If I come to the UK for my training, then it would mean I need to see my patients online. I guess it's easier to have seminars online than seeing clients online. I wish to ask if the BPF has plans to bring the training online. And do you want to answer that in terms of our...
If I perhaps begin well, perhaps a starting point is what we are required to offer our trainees to fit with the BPC requirements for accrediting accrediting our training. And it is an in-person training. So substantially, the training post-lockdown has moved, albeit a bit slowly in some areas, to being offered in person, which means seminars in person, supervision, there's more flexibility, but the essential work with both patients and the essential work for the trainee with their own analyst or psychotherapist is required to be in person. So this makes the range of people in terms of geography who can currently attend, it constrains that. I mean, in individual situations, there may be consideration, but essentially it is an in-person training, and that's to ensure our registration and our commitment.
If I can add a bit to that, we do have in mind the possibility of including people who live in London or near London and therefore would find it difficult to attend seminars in person. So we don't have a requirement that seminars always be attended in person. We do have an expectation that people attend a certain number of seminars in person in the course of a year, but we are flexible about allowing people to join online for seminars. But just reiterating what Anne's just said, in terms of the actual clinical side of the training, it is a requirement of the BPC, which is our registration body, that this be done in person. So people would have to see their patients in person, not online, except in exceptional circumstances, and also to attend their own therapy or analysis in person. Hope that answers your question. What's the difference between our training and the course that Sheila was speaking about? Well, our training is a training in intensive psychoanalytic work. So people see their patients a minimum of 3 times a week. They're training patients. They also do some less intensive work, as we mentioned before, but they see their intensive patients at least 3 times a week. And they have their own analysis or psychotherapy at least 3 times a week. Also, the model is specifically psychoanalytic. We don't have some psychoanalytic and some Jungian. Mentioned the different schools within psychoanalysis, but that does not include the Jungian training. There is a separate intensive Jungian training, which people will be talking about this afternoon for those who are interested more in the Jungian rather than in the psychoanalytic strand. Is this course possible for someone looking to fit it around a full-time job? Well, yes and no. It's a very demanding training. We do have some trainees who are working full-time. When I did my training, I did it while working full-time. We're very mindful of the fact that it is expensive with the intensive psychotherapy, psychoanalysis people have to have themselves, the course fee with paying for supervision. And that means that for some people, it's not possible for them to consider cutting down their work to be able to do this course. It is a demanding course, so if you're working full time, it will be very demanding, very intensive. You won't have much time during term time left for other things, but it is possible. And we do, as I say, we do have a substantial number of our trainees currently who are doing the full-time work as well as the training part-time.
I mean, it's to give a bit of a feel for the shape of the training. If you're on the full training route, the first year, the platform year, when you may or may not be doing a psychiatric placement or may not be doing an infant observation, you won't be seeing your training patients in that year. And that is more manageable, depending on the work you do, to fit round a full-time job. As the clinical work builds up, which requires both seeing the patient, writing notes, and having individual supervision on each patient, it is very challenging. It depends on your work and support and a number of factors. But I would say that the intensity of the training builds up in the second or third year for most people.
Yeah. And then, of course, if you go beyond the 4 years, it decreases because you don't have theory seminars after that time. And you may have finished with one of your patients already by then. So, how long would you expect someone to have been in at least 3 times a week therapy before they start the course? Well, we do say 1 year, but we're flexible about things. Clearly, we want people to be settled in their therapy, in their intensive therapy, before they start the course. It's difficult to settle in therapy. It's difficult to settle in the course, and it's particularly difficult if you're trying to do both at the same time. So we say a year, which would hopefully mean that people would be very well settled, but obviously we're flexible. We tend to be flexible generally about things, and we don't stick absolutely to what we say as would be ideal, because we know that everyone's different, and what might be right for one person is not necessarily right or a requirement for somebody else. Anne, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I think it's important to point out that the selection process involves 2 in-depth interviews, and it may be that the outcome of that process is a sort of shared feeling that it would be more appropriate for an applicant to be in their own personal therapy for a little bit longer. They may have applied at having done a few months in their new therapy, but that's carefully thought about through the selection process, and there may be a feeling that the applicant, we were confident to offer a deferred place, but not to be taken up until the person's had longer in the personal therapy. So that's one possibility. But we certainly do accept people who've had less than a year in their personal therapy with an approved therapist. And often people have had a previous therapy before preparing to apply for our training.
Do graduates of our course tend to practice as private intensive psychoanalysts, psychotherapists, or do they also work in clinical placement settings? It's mixed. It's very mixed. Some people specifically want to work privately, and when they're qualified, they move very quickly into setting up a private practice and growing it. Some people want to work in the statutory sector in the NHS or in other social settings like charities. Some people are already working in the NHS or charity settings and want to continue that work. So we do sometimes have people, very occasionally, who go full-time and into NHS and don't work at all privately, but most people do have a private practice, even if it's a small practice, and a substantial number of our graduates do work in the NHS or in the charity sector as well as working privately. I think that's part of what drives the importance in our course of ensuring that people get the right sort of training and experience to enable them to work less intensively as well as very intensively, and to enable them to work in settings other than private practice. So it does inform something around how we developed our training curriculum. Is there flexibility around the entry requirement about being in psychoanalytic psychotherapy 3 times a week? And I think that's one for you.
I'm not quite sure whether this caller is asking for an answer to a different question from the one we just answered, but the requirement is to be settled in intensive psychoanalytic psychotherapy with someone on our approved list in order to move forward onto the training. Have I missed something out, Anne? I'm wondering.
I think that's the answer. You know, it is a requirement for a minimum of 3 times a week psychotherapy.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
With an approved training therapist. For a placement in a psychiatric setting, if I've not done it before, will a placement be arranged, or will I need to hunt a placement myself? I would expect it would be quite difficult to get into a psychiatric setting if I'm not coming from a medical background. We have had difficulty finding placements for people. We don't actually arrange the placement, but we do have links with various places that might be willing to offer psychiatric placements. And we do now in the BPF have a placement tutor who hopefully will also be developing further links with places that might be able to offer psychiatric placement. It will be down to the trainee to make contact with the places, but we will be able to give trainees details of who they might contact and how they might make contact. And it is a lot easier for people to get a placement if they've already been accepted onto the training. You know, it's very difficult for people who haven't yet been accepted onto the training to get a placement. But with the new foundation course, we're hoping that placements will be made possible through that course as well, and that possibly people will be able to get a psychiatric placement if they're doing the foundation course. So if you haven't got that kind of background or that kind of experience, it is, I think, useful to think about whether the foundation course would be suitable for you as a starting point.
It's also perhaps worth mentioning that the trainees share helpful information regarding their own experiences So if you have already joined the training and haven't yet set up a psychiatric placement, sometimes it's your fellow trainees, particularly when geographical considerations play a part in what might work, who can help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also there are some trainees who are working in various kinds of jobs in the NHS who also have contacts and can be helpful in that kind of way. Entry requirements, what are they for the PPA training beyond personal intensive analysis, psychotherapy, and the personal attributes you described? Anne?
Well, as I say, we interview applicants whose application form satisfies us that they are in a position to be considered for the training. And we're thinking both about personal suitability and professional readiness. It is a lengthy and challenging training. It is important that at the time of application, people are fairly settled in their life circumstances, I would say. That's an important starting point. And in terms of specifics, people who come from a psychology background or who have already got a counselling or psychodynamic qualification will have covered a lot of theory. They will have clinical experience, but there are other ways of gaining a sort of solid foundation before considering the training. The foundation course, an MSc, these are helpful. Some people, of course, come from an academic background, and for them the key thing is really making the step to seeing people in a sort of counselling role initially. And there are voluntary placements that people can apply for to begin the building up experience of being one-to-one with another person in distress. And then from a voluntary placement, then perhaps the next step would be a clinical placement where the applicant is working perhaps in the NHS or another organisation with individual supervision. So there's a sort of building up of grasp of the sort of, or a sort of enough of a feel for the theory to feel interested in psychoanalytic work, enough personal experience to feel that if you have something that you valued, you also might want to train in the field in which you valued. And then these more specific elements like voluntary placements, clinical placements, foundation courses, and so on.